So this is a typical setup that I will use for doing my thumbnails. It's basically just a black frame filled in over a gray background and another layer on top just for labels. When you're working, especially with client work, it's very useful to label your thumbnails so you can communicate with them efficiently about it. And then what I do is basically create grouped layers for each of the thumbnails. And within those groups will be all the different layers needed to go create the thumbnails. So here I'm just creating 4 different layer groups, naming them accordingly, and it's always very good to be efficient and organized especially when it comes to client work. So now you'll see the reference application I use. It's called PureRef, and it's a fantastic lightweight program that allows you to put a whole bunch of images very easily into a sort of tiled mosaic area and click on them and view them in full if you want to. You can also zoom in and out at will, flip the images. There's a lot of different options. These are images that some of the images I got from the client directly, like this one here, which came from their game engine itself. So this is another one directly from game engine, and that one again. And some of the other ones, all the other photos, I basically collected myself. There's probably 100 others, but these are the ones I picked to use to refer to for these thumbnails. The other setup thing is I'll always have an overview, that image in the top left of the 4 thumbs, which shows a small view of the thumbnail. And it's very important when you're doing thumbnails to work on them zoomed out, not zoomed in closely. You don't want to work on details, you want to work on the broad composition. And you only get in closer once you've got your main shapes sorted. So here I'm about to start. I'd normally use a really hard brush with a little bit of taper on it, but no opacity linked to pressure. It's a flat brush. And I created a layer for the sky or the background, and I've just used a light value and have started to block in some shapes for the sky. And every time I want to add another layer, I'll go ahead and add it. And this is a medium or a mid-ground layer for the, I guess what will end up being castles or ruins. And again, by having things on different layers, it's very easy to paint on them with the one value and then switch to your eraser and then erase out that value to create the shapes that you want. It's much easier that way, I find, than actually painting in light and dark values on one layer. So I'm just painting with one value and then erasing out to show the layers underneath. And I find it much easier that way. I have a hotkey that's linked to my eraser. It's linked to the E on the keyboard, so every time I hit E, it switches to eraser, so it's actually very quick. So here I'm thinking about the foreground now, and thinking about shape and value, and trying to drive the composition. I'm starting to think about focal points. And where do I think the character might be, where I think the main focal point will be, and all the lines that I use to show the shapes are going to be driving that. I'm also thinking about light versus against dark, or counter change, and that is basically playing with the shapes and the overlaps to create a sense of depth. So whenever you have dark in front of light, a dark object in front of a light one, or light one in front of dark, it tends to create depth. So here I'm refining the shapes of the mountains. Notice I'm pulling the shapes of the mountains to point to that darker castle It's in the midground. So always thinking about broad shapes and composition, and you know, the other principles like rhythm and flow, and movement. None of the marks that I make are random. There's always some initial thought behind it. I mean, there's a little bit of noodling as well, but generally I'm trying specific things with the marks I make. Here I'm always looking at reference as well, so I look to the reference and then I look to the composition of the thumbnail, and I'll pick shapes and I'll try them out. I'll get some ideas from the reference and try those out as I go along. And so here I'm starting to put in the silhouette of the character, and so this concept, they wanted their character in it, and there's a reference to him there. And I like working with silhouettes for characters as well. It actually makes it a lot easier to play with sort of their gesture and the way they're standing and all that kind of stuff. So now I'm adding a little bit more, again, more compositional lines that point towards the character, but add a little bit of sense of what's going on in the foreground. And I'm just playing with shapes. Shapes and light and dark and overlap at this point to create movement in the composition. I'm also, at this point, thinking about what can I take away from shapes or add to shapes to add a little bit more depth to them, to create that sense of depth. And also giving them a little bit of indication of what is actually, what are these things, what's going on. Like, I'm not adding too much detail. I don't want to think about detail at all at this point. But you do want to start getting some indications of, you know, what are these things actually. So I'm continuing to refine what will end up being the sort of focal point ruin area, and the general sort of movement of rhythm of the comp is from bottom left at the moment, where the guy is standing, and the sort of S curve that leads up to the to that ruin castle silhouette. The mountains and sky in the background, and the canvas is basically framed by these foreground ruined structures. So there's certainly a sense of movement flowing into the piece that I'm trying to basically well, have it work perfectly, or as well as I can. And you'll notice, you know, when I'm not so sure, I make big changes, but once I get closer to a composition that I think I like, I'm going to start refining things a bit more. There I just added a very simple gradient to the sky to make it a little bit more realistic. Working with flat colors is great. Very easy to work with just shape, but then once you want to start getting a bit more realistic, you have to start adding gradients to them. So here, I'm actually quite happy with the composition at this point. So I'm okay with going in and a little bit more zoomed in, a little bit more detail, and starting to finesse some of those shapes. So speaking about what shapes do, the client wanted a sort of gloomy, not very inviting atmosphere, and you know, for the fantasy landscape, you want it to be gloomy and not inviting, you add spiky mountains. So that's kind of what I'm doing there. It may be a little bit cliche, but then again, shape language and these things actually do work. So, you know, you can work within the cliche and still make it cool. Well, I hope you can. So here I decided to amp up the comp even more to drive the focus to the character. So I created this another layer of value, which is angled towards the character, so it helps with sort of pushing our view towards him and also away from him up to the ruin. And I'm adding another layer of something. I don't even know what it is. Behind him, creating a bit of overlap with the midground, adding just that little bit more depth, thinking about, you know, the rhythm and flow of the shapes that are being created. And, you know, at this point, I think it's probably been, I'm not actually sure, maybe 15 minutes. And already, I mean, the bones of the piece are there, the reed is there. You can get a sense of the sort of scale and the perspective already, and the value. So, you know, it doesn't take very long to get a good read if you're working in this sort of simplistic flat value way. Now here I'm adding a little bit more suggestion of what the environment is. They wanted sort of an alpine, foresty kind of environment. So these are just on a new layer, a tree, custom tree brush stamp that I created before the project, specifically for it. And I'm just stamping those on a layer. You know, I keep stamping and erasing because I want it in the exact right position that I think works. And then I just layer lock them and fill them with the right value, and depending on the value, it'll pull and push them back and forth in the perspective. So, you know, the tree in the foreground is a lot darker than the ones further away. So I think here I realized I made a mistake with the background, so I'm just consolidating the background and making it an actual thing. And now that #1 thumbnail group layer is all self-contained. So I just changed my brushes to a sort of round, not a round, a square brush. And square brushes are really good for architecture because they indicate sort of more structure and blocks of things. And so I'm using that, and I'm looking at the reference. You can see there's this sort of domed area, castle thing in the reference. And I'm using those just to get a hint of some of the shapes. I'm really looking at trying to get interesting shapes. And, you know, again, what am I doing? I'm toying with shapes. I'm thinking about overlap and light versus dark, getting depth, driving the composition. These are the very basic sort of fundamentals that get, you know, any image to read nicely. I'm not thinking about detail at all. So here I've just created a filter layer. In Photoshop it would be an adjustment layer, and I've created a curves and dulled down the overall values of the piece using that layer. And then with a mask on that layer, well, actually in Krita it works a little bit differently, but what you can do is you paint on this filter layer or adjustment layer with black, and that basically makes that where you paint transparent. So it shows up the layer and all the layers underneath. And so what you're essentially doing is you've got the dark layer on top, and when you're painting in the mask with black, you're making the lighter layer come through. So it's like painting with light. And it's actually a very easy way of being able to trial out different lighting schemes without having to worry about, you know, messing up your shapes or changing the shapes or doing anything. You're just basically painting with light. And you can do a couple of these layers and trial out a few different things, and it's really quick and easy. I'll probably show something. I didn't record all of it, but I'll show that process in a little bit more detail separately later on. So I'm just using the same technique, but adding another layer of, I guess, lighting. And now I'm adding smaller marks and more highlighting to where I think the focal point will be, which will be that ruin up at the top there. So now I'm starting to, initially you start with bigger shapes, bigger brushes, and then the further on you go, when you start nailing down your focal points, you go down to the smaller shapes and implying more detail. And that's something generally you'll see me do. So this is the second thumbnail. The thing that you just saw on screen with the three sort of triangular things, that's actually the perspective tool in Krita. And it just allows you to constrain your painted lines when you need to the various axes of the perspective. And that's fantastic because you don't have to draw perspective grids or anything like that. It makes it very easy. I think Autodesk has the same thing, the same tool. I'm not sure if Photoshop can do it yet. So, the process is pretty much exactly the same. I don't always pick the perspective beforehand. Sometimes I'll just sort of wing it. But more recently I've found, especially when I do a smaller number of thumbnails, and I know that the sketch is going to be, pretty well, not detailed, but the composition will be very well fixed, and the perspective will be fixed in my thumbnails, then I'll set up perspectives beforehand. But if not, I'll just have a general idea and just try and work with interesting shapes instead. But it's nice to have perspective set up because then you don't really have to think about it too much as well. So either way can work. So, the same process here. I'm just creating different layers. This is a mid-ground layer, which I'll use for the ruins. And I'm just trialing out shapes and carving out negative and positive spaces and creating overlap with the different layers, overlapping the dark value on top of lighter values to create that depth. This particular thumbnail, I think, I didn't have a great idea of what it was gonna end up like, so it goes through a lot of iteration, and that's actually a key kind of point with thumbnails is you shouldn't be precious about them. It's an ability for you to be able to just play and have fun and be a kid again. Like this is what it's all about. For me, it's the creating the fantasy, creating the world, and when it comes to thumbnailing, you just want to go wild. And I don't mean wild in a messy, inaccurate way, not thinking about fundamentals, but I mean allow yourself the pleasure to just play with shapes, play with ideas. It's basically visual brainstorming. So don't censor yourself. If you have an idea, just try it. Working in this way with some simple layers and flat colors, it's actually, well, you don't actually care about destroying things. You can try something, and because you don't have much time invested in it, it's easy to destroy it. So you'll see me do that all the time. I'll put down, excuse me, a whole bunch of marks. And, a little bit later on, I'll decide, well, that just doesn't work, and erase it all out. Who cares? You want your painting to work, so make it work. Do what you need. Excuse me. I'm starting to get a little bit of a feel for this perspective. It's definitely, it's a three-point perspective looking up. The horizon line is very much below the canvas itself, so you can't really see it. So I'm trying to get a sense of, well, what's the layout of this land? And I'm starting to get a sense of we're looking up at a sloping mountainside, looking up to ruins and, maybe a mountain pass up at the top. So I'm starting to, indicate what the ruins are. Again, this isn't so much design of architecture, but it is hinting at shapes. Because I know, you know, it's going to be medieval style castles, so you know, while I don't have to nail down exactly the design, there are certain shapes which I can sort of basically put in there and start to use. So here the appearance of the fantasy pointy mountains again. You know, it's yeah. Sometimes it is hard to stay away from cliches like this, but you know, then again, cliches like this work for a reason. So yeah. One of the things to watch out for is tangents. And tangents are where, you know, objects on different layers, their contours, their outlines touch each other, so that it breaks the illusion of depth. So you always want to make sure there aren't any tangents between things in different depths, and also that your sense of overlap of one object over another is clear, that there's a definite sense of overlap. If things are almost overlapping but not quite, they'll break the sort of sensation of depth. So that's another thing to consider when you're looking at designing your shapes. It's the overlap. So right now, the you know, the midground is sort of looking like something, but I haven't figured out the foreground. So this is me really just trying out a whole bunch of stuff. Is that a bridge? I don't know. An archway, crumbling, you know, walls. Is it somewhere I can put a character? That's also what I'm thinking. I mean, this is essentially mood design for a video game, so and they wanted a character, so you've got to build that in. Where is your character going? That makes sense. You know, it's not just standing in the middle of a rock somewhere looking like a dork, but he may be in the middle of something, exploring a ruin, looking up at a vista, whatever you come up in your mind as narrative. So I'm starting to play with the foreground elements, and I really like that sort of diagonal bottom left to top right movement of the piece, so I decided to try and amp that up a little bit more with this foreground element, like a, you know, fallen over tower block or something, ruins, something like that. And I'm starting to think about the character. I'm still not entirely sure where he's going, but you know, so I just got rid of him because I'm like, okay, that's not going to work. So here's a little platform thing with some plinths, and notice the shapes that I use always overlap. So that dark shape, I didn't just have it, you know, end where the other midground archway gray shape is. I actually went and overlapped it, and that creates depth. So now that I'm really liking what that dark area is doing for the composition, so I figured, man, that's a brilliant place to put the character. I create a new layer for the character. Basically anything that you think you will need to either move around or have as different values, you should probably keep it on a separate layer. It just makes tweaking and moving and adjusting things so much easier if you have specific things in different layers. I mean, you'll notice for thumbnails I don't actually have that many layers at all. I think maybe max 7, 6 or 7, depending on the kind of scene. But yeah, it is helpful to have some. In my personal work, I'll work with less layers. But with client work, you certainly don't want to redo anything, or be able. You want to be able to change things quickly. So here I'm still working with the foreground elements, not really digging or liking what's going on there. One of the issues also with working in this way, where you're basically separating out layers of sort of flat grayscale value, is things can end up being or looking like a collage, like very collagey, cut out 2D, and if you're not careful, it can actually detract from your piece quite a lot, because you may not be creating a sense of continuous space, because all you see are layers floating around on their own. And so while it's a very useful technique to use in this stage of creating compositions that work, I also start to think in this stage where generally the composition is pretty much there, and I kind of know the idea that I'm going to go with. That's when I start thinking about, well, okay, how do these layers transition between each other? So what is actually between these layers? I may not paint all of that stuff. Some of it may be hidden, but I at least want to have an idea of what is in between those layers, so I can imply that later on. Because you want your spaces to be real, living, spaces that have life, that exist, so that, objects, you can imply that you can actually walk around all these objects and in them and under them, and actually interact with them. You don't want them to appear just like they're floating layers on their own. So that's I'll explain, or I'll be able to show how we can do that a little bit more once the main shapes are in. But it is something to think about. So I'm tweaking the composition here. I had a look at it and I realized that actually the sky wasn't really doing too much for the comp. So I'm basically opening up the sky a lot more, and I'm tweaking the shape of the mountains to really drive a bit more focus into that area. And the sort of double towered thing that is against the light is actually quite a good focal point as well. So at every stage of this thumbnailing process, I am actually problem solving anything to do with fundamentals. Fundamentals of the composition, of value, of rhythm and movement, the perspective, anything, any of those basic fundamentals that if I'm not happy with them or I see issues with them, this is the point where I'm going to fix them. I may do tweaks later on, obviously, as a piece develops or as you get client feedback, or there's definite points where you can add and improve things. But the main issues of any piece, you should really nail and nut those out at this stage right here. Because if you don't, all you're going to do is have to nut them out once you've put 6 hours of rendering into all of the pieces, and that's one of the most horrible feelings, knowing that you have to redo an entire something because you were too lazy to actually address the problem when you could have at this stage when it was easy. So yeah, don't be lazy, because you'll pay for it later. So this is a different technique for, I guess, lighting, and that is you layer lock the various layers, and with either gradients or a soft brush, you can brush on with slightly darker or slightly lighter values than the layer itself. And what that does is actually create a very quick and pretty realistic read for your piece that you don't get with just flat values. I mean, as you can see, it's very easy to get a sense of atmosphere, and using atmospheric perspective with those value shifts using this technique. I really like using the technique because it's so easy It's quick, and it's also very easy to change if you don't like something. I'm starting to think about lighting at this point too. The lighting is basically top left, where the mountain is against that sky, and it's coming streaming down the hill or the valley, so or the mountainside. So I am thinking about the lighting when I put down my soft areas of value. I'm not getting too detailed about it, really, at this point, but I'm actually just looking to tweak atmosphere and depth by just adding a little bit more value transition within the layers and between the layers themselves. And you can see how quickly, you know, it's gone from 5 or 6 flat layers to something that actually feels more like an actual space with atmosphere in it. And that's the beauty of soft value transitions and gradients, is, well, they mimic real life a lot closer than you can with flat values. So, you know, value transitions are important. Again, I'm using, see that soft light value brush to pop out that silhouette of the dark castle a bit more. So I'm just going around and tweaking things all the time, looking at areas that need to be darker or lighter. This is another technique, is you pick one silhouette or one area that you want some texture to, and with a texture brush I'm just stamping some texture all over it, and then I use basically a smudge brush to smudge around you know, some of the edges away from that texture. It's just another technique. I mean, there's 1,000 techniques you can use to add texture to things, but at this kind of stage of thumbnailing, you really just want to do the minimal amount of showing what something is made out of, you know, and even then you don't really need to. But custom brushes are a good way to get texture down quickly, and then you can just erase or smudge them out in areas and you get a pretty decent result. That's just what I'm doing in the foreground there as well. So I'm tweaking shapes still a little bit, and with the curves on particular layers you can also tweak values quite easily because you have those layers. So, you know, this technique just allows you a lot of flexibility. It may not feel that intuitive at first because you're not just painting and going all for it, but you know, you really start to appreciate. I mean, you know, the software, these digital software tools are built to make our life easier. Why not use them that way? No reason at all. It's not a cheat. It's not a cheat to use tools to make your life easier. So I'm just trying to plug in gaps and figure out some more interesting foreground elements there, but yeah, not exactly sure. And here I think I'm done, but I'm just adjusting the values overall for the piece. So I've already done a kind of lighting pass with the soft brush within the layers, so I don't need a separate lighting pass, but I do want to tweak the overall values because that gives you know, a better range. You can really play with the finer atmosphere within a particular lighting scheme by tweaking the curves like on an adjustment layer over the whole thing. So again, that's another technique just to be able to iterate, and you know, you can turn it on and off and see if you've done good work, and I think I liked it, so I'm going to stop the demo there, and let's talk a little bit about the, well, what you've been waiting for, Simon 2. So, now that you've had a look at the 2 discussion videos on how to create depth and about contrast and focal points. And you've seen me paint a couple of what I call rough value sketches of basic composition and all the major elements. No crazy detail, but the guts of the piece are there. The read is there. What I want you guys to do are 5 of your own value sketches. Yep, that's right. 5 of them. There are only 4 here, but I'd like you to do 5. And within them, I really want to think about those principles that I was talking about in the videos. Obviously, I want environments. You can choose any setting you like. You can use your own IP if you have one that you want to develop in this course, so that's totally fine. But most importantly, in those 5 sketches, I would like you to show me at least one of these within those 5 sketches. So I don't mean show all of these in one sketch, but within those 5 sketches, I'd like you to tick off each one of these along the way. So they're pretty simple. 1, 2, 3 point perspective scenes, at least one of each. A viewpoint looking up or down at something that could actually be just part of the 3-point perspective scene. Something massive in size, like something really big. I want to feel it. I want to feel how big it is. I want to see a vista that looks out far into the distance. And I want to see something engineered. So it could be architecture or a big spaceship, or basically you just you come up with whatever you like. This is a free-form value sketching exercise. So you can also combine a couple of these in one sketch. That's totally fine too. But I just want to give you a little bit of constraint on what to do, just so that you have something to get your teeth into. It's not a lot, but something. Okay. Oh, the other thing that I wanted to say, that in the demo, I was talking about reference and using reference, but for this, you don't have to use reference if you don't want to. The only reason I had to use it was because it's actually for a client piece, and I needed to use reference in order to progress. So yeah, use reference if you like, but don't spend a lot of time gathering stuff if you don't want to. Yep, I wanted you to have clear focal points. You can pick one clear focal point, but then, think about a couple of others. So in this, for example, we sort of have a bunch of areas which, draw focus. So pick one primary focal point and then a couple of other around the image, and think about your composition. Lead the eye into the image. Where are the contrast points? What are they doing for the image? This kind of stuff is the kind of stuff that I actually want you to focus on, and of course values and atmosphere, and a little bit of lighting as well. So it's pretty much bringing everything together. It's a big jump from those simple studies, because you're really going to be testing yourselves and your own skills in these. So, take your time. I don't want crazy detail. I want a good read. Like with these, from afar, it's pretty easy to figure out what is going on. So I'd like that. There is absolutely no heavy detail in any of these. So keep that in mind. This is, again, mostly just a fun exercise, so treat it that way. I actually, you probably noticed I haven't talked at all about composition, about the rule of thirds, golden mean, leading lines and all that kind of stuff, L shapes, circular. I actually haven't gone into that because I actually want to see what you guys come up with. And then in the critiques, maybe I can talk a little bit about some of those things to help you think about your compositions and arrange them better. So there's a reason for that. And here are some tips. Just read through those. and maybe they'll help you. The submission deadline is 9th of October, 9 p.m. That's next Friday, New Zealand time, 9 p.m. I might change that a little bit, but if I do, I will post on the forum. It'll be on the website, and I will send an email out as well. And the submission site link, the little widget, will be the same one, same thing. So yeah, enjoy this. This is the first time I get to see your actual work, not just studies, and simple compositional things. So yeah, have fun, guys. Cheers.